I'm Sonia De La Fosse, and I manage all of our educator engagement programs here at Microsoft. I get to work with teachers in every country, sharing my passion for blending pedagogy with technology in order to create great learning experiences for students. I spent 21 years working in public education here in the US before joining Microsoft 5.5 years ago.
And I'm Jennifer King, the Schools Engagement Lead here at Microsoft UK. Just like Sonia, I also get to spend my time learning and sharing with educators all over the country, being inspired by how they use technology and supporting their digital transformation. I'm also a former educator, having taught all over the world before coming to Microsoft.
We are so excited to welcome you to this special CPD session with Ribblesdale High School in the UK. They have built a really strong hybrid learning model, and they're going to be sharing how they've used teams to create a dynamic and engaging student learning experience.
Here in the UK and in so many other countries, schools and teachers have experienced how our Microsoft Innovative Educator programs and our Showcase School programs can support transformation across teaching and learning. I'd like to hand it off to Stephen Cox and Paul Edge at Ribblesdale.
Thank you, Sonia and Jennifer, for that fantastic intro. We've got a lot to live up to now, so I hope we manage to deliver the expectations that you've set. I'm now going to start this presentation by handing straight over to Stephen, who's going to give you a bit of context around Ribblesdale as a school.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that. And hi, everybody. Just a little bit of information, really, about the school. We're a large, comprehensive school. We have over 1,300 pupils at the school. We're a local authority school located in the northwest of the UK. And for several years now, we've been using Office 365 across the whole school. And it's grown and grown, of course, in its use over the last few years. And of course, very recently, it's been absolutely essential to enable us to operate effectively. We're also a Department for Education Demonstrator, EdTech Demonstrator school. We got that status earlier this year. And as you would imagine, it's been a very rapid development. And we've worked collaboratively with very, very many schools and colleges across the Northwest specifically. Within EdTech itself, we've not had any additional funding for that. So all of the things which we've done with EdTech have very much been part of our whole school improvement plan and subsequently funded by the school's normal funding processes. And the last thing, and perhaps the most important thing, as a school, we're very much evidence informed. So everything which we do as a school is based upon evidence. And that is one of our mantras, really. We will only do things if we feel there's an argument and proof that it will have an impact ultimately on the learning for our young people. So I'm just going to hand back to Paul now, and he's going to go through the five main areas, really, of hybrid learning. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Stephen. In terms of hybrid learning, I think as you can see from the graphic on screen, there are many different lenses of hybrid learning, and all the elements such as synchronous, asynchronous, virtual and face-to-face fit together. It's really important, though, to be able to move between those different lenses. And in order to do that, it's about that strategic agility. So in terms of your school, you need to make sure that you can move seamlessly as much as possible between one and the other. And that applies to both teachers and students alike. And ultimately, it's about making sure that you have a plan and you develop that plan to look at how you operate from a teaching and learning perspective. And in some instances, you might slip to a new model about how you go about doing that to give you that strategic agility to move between the two. And ultimately, you're aiming for a bumpless transfer, whether it's on-site learning or off-site learning. There's a bumpless transfer between the two. And essentially, what that means is for your teachers and for your students that they see very little difference between the two. And that leads on to that continuity of learning and delivery. And in order to facilitate that, you might need to conduct a review of the curriculum structure to ensure that the delivery is as you want it, both within school and out of school. And I suppose the question on everyone's lips at the moment is synchronous or asynchronous or a blend of both. And I feel that like any teaching and learning tool, you choose the right tool for that situation. So if synchronous live delivery works, then that is the right tool at that point in time. Quite often asynchronous will work as well in terms of the fact that students can access that content on demand within their own timescales. And there's been a lot of research around this in the past few months around this sort of hybrid learning model. And as you can see there on the screen, there's a quote from Michael Fullen, who's done a lot of research on this. And we will also share you a link to his report as well, so you can have a look at that. And I think it's worth taking a little bit of time to reflect on the findings of that report and others to see what nuggets you can draw from those to apply in your own setting. So in terms of hybrid learning, there are 5 main structures, and starting top left on your screen, there's the learning environment. So what does that look like in a virtual sense? We all can describe a physical learning environment, but that changes a little bit, particularly when your hybrid moves towards that virtual learning setting. At the top right, then, that learning environment then allows that class community to start and to foster and to nurture that support. And that's very important for our young people, particularly when they're working remotely, because they can feel quite isolated from the rest of their peers. The lesson design then comes next, and it's how you're going to structure your lesson to enable the best delivery for the young people that we are teaching at the time. And that's no different to what we're doing from a pedagogy perspective within a classroom. The learning design will allow that effective delivery of those learning points throughout that process. And then if the lesson design is correct, then that engagement and interactivity is going to come with it. So have we got the right balance of activities, different strategies in there, different opportunities for our young people to be engaged in their learning, to interact with each other on a peer-to-peer level as well? And I think the final part for me is actually the most important. It's about that assessment and feedback. So how are we going to understand and fully appreciate where our young people are at that point in their learning journey? If we're in a physical classroom, that's quite straightforward because we do that by question and answer and circulation around the learning space. But when you're looking, particularly when hybrid learning goes over into remote working, then that becomes more difficult. And that's where tools such as Forms and OneNote to give feedback really come into their own. And we're going to take a deeper dive into those further on in this presentation. I'm now going to hand you back to Stephen, who's going to have a look at the strategic planning aspects for hybrid learning that you need to consider.
Thanks, Paul. I suppose at Ribblesdale we were really, really lucky in that we had considerable time to plan strategically for what we wanted EdTech to look like across the school. It's a journey we've been on for the last 7 years, really. And part of that has been planning for a hybrid sort of approach to what we deliver. Many schools, unfortunately, because of the virus outbreak, have not had that luxury. So the strategic planning, I guess, for many schools has been much more of an emergency type of planning than perhaps a more long thought out strategic plan. However, it is essential. It's absolutely essential, no matter how quick your time frame is to implement these things. And there's some key questions, and none of these questions are probably surprises for many people listening to this. The first one is, of course, what's the ultimate goal? What do you want to achieve? I'm a big believer in sort of rethinking a little bit the approach to technology. Many schools in the past have been presented with technology and then have thought about how they could use it. And in my view, in our view, that's the wrong way. You have to start at the point of what do we want to achieve, and then think about, well, what technology can help us achieve that? And it might be subtle, it might be a bit nuanced, but I think it's an important distinction. And then also, more recently, we've got to consider what we've learned during the whole lockdown situation, when there's been vast numbers of children not in school learning remotely. And there are huge lessons which we've learned from there, some real positives to help us point us in perhaps a slightly different direction in terms of how strategically we approach hybrid learning in the future. Some things were, of course, really successful, others not so successful. And it's important that we recognise those and we flex accordingly. So in terms of that sort of longer term journey with technology and with the strategic approach to it, absolutely vital to that. And again, this might seem really obvious, is ensuring that staff are trained well. At Ribblesdale, we have a virtual school. Paul's going to elaborate on this in a minute. We have very, very explicit expectations of our students in terms of what we expect them to do within the hybrid situation. We have clear guidance for parents and indeed the wider community, because they have an even more important role, of course, when pupils are not in school and they're learning remotely. And of course, it's all got to dovetail in with the wider aspects of school and our improvement goals and what we really want to achieve. So making sure that those meld into each other is really, really important, and making sure that the curriculum is continuous as much as it possibly can be, and that we're not putting in add-ons, that it's actually synchronised with what we would normally be doing in school or out of school. And of course, key to that is how we use the digital transformation sort of structure to enable that to happen. Paul, do you want to add some sort of Ribblesdale sort of points of view from this information?
I think absolutely, Stephen. There are a couple of points that I just want to focus on a little bit more there. The first one is the sort of the staff training, and particularly the wellbeing around Ribblesdale Virtual School. We were acutely aware of the loads on our staff as we went to sort of remote and then hybrid learning situation. And we've implemented Ribblesdale Virtual School, which is essentially a school within a school where we have a team of staff who support that hybrid delivery. And it works really well to ensure that the staff within the classroom can absolutely focus on the day-to-day bread and butter of classroom delivery. I think the second aspect that I really want to call out there is that digital transformation and having a plan. And that plan really needs to be integrated with the school improvement planning process. It's not a standalone process. It's how technology is going to support the school improvement over the next few years. And without that, and without everyone buying into that plan, then it's not going to be successful in its implementation like any planning process. So that's really one for myself that I'd really ask you just to go away and reflect on. So now we considered the strategy behind it. I want to take a bit more time now to focus on the 5 pillars of the hybrid learning journey. And I'm going to hand back to Stephen at this point, who's going to look through each one of those pillars in more detail to give you a flavour of what they're about and how we do it at Ribblesdale.
Okay, so we'll begin with the learning environment. The learning environment itself at Ribblesdale, we are very much based upon Teams. And of course, Teams is a great single point for so many things. So we have class teams across the whole school. We make sure that there's consistency within that structure for teachers, for staff, and of course, there's the consistency for parents as well. The great thing we like about using Teams is that we can switch between applications within it very easily. We know where everything is. We can monitor everything very, very, very carefully. And indeed, as many people realise, Teams is also an evolving sort of product. So we really like it when the updates come along and additional aspects of it are offered to us and to our students. So the fact that it's live actually and is ever developing is also a very positive thing in many ways. We have common structures for all our curriculum areas, and we ensure that we have very clear rules of how the actual platform is used by both our staff, but also our pupil students as well. And Paul, you probably want to add a little bit more detail from the Ribblesdale perspective on how this works.
Yes, I will. And Teams is absolutely essential. It's that central digital hub for us at Ribblesdale, using things like the calendar and the assignments in there to support the organisation and planning process, not just for teachers, but for our students as well. And what Teams does is it gives us that consistency across the organisation, whether we're actually physically in school or remote working. And extensively across school, we also use OneNote, and that allows that feedback and that assessment to take place in one standard place for all students to access. But it also means that feedback can also be very timely and impactful as well on our students. The learning tools is also a massive thing for us at Ribblesdale. When all these students join us in Year 7 at Ribblesdale, they're all trained how to use learning tools and the features within it. And that has certainly stood us in good stead in terms of their remote working and how they're actually tackling the learning at home and being able to support themselves. And as we've gone through the lockdown and then into this hybrid situation, we're producing more and more content. There's more pre-recorded video and little nuggets that our staff are producing. And this is now all stored centrally on Microsoft Stream. And the big advantage of that is it's content not just for now, but also for the future. And it allows our young people to access on demand to fit in with what's going on at home, both now and in the future. and we can get a real flavour of what's going on in terms of engagement, and we'll draw this out in a little bit more detail further on. But Teams Insight is used by all teachers to look at interactivity and engagement of our students within their team, and that means we can, look for any issues around students not engaging and deal with them through the normal processes within school. So after looking at the first pillar, I'm now going to hand you back to Stephen, who's going to consider the second pillar, which has a focus on class community.
Okay, thanks, Paul. The class community, or establishing a really good class community both in school and out of school, is really, really important. And of course, more recently, with hybrid learning, we've had to deal with isolation of students psychologically as well as physically. And it's really, really important that we utilise everything at our disposal, technically wise, to ensure that we try and combat that and reduce that feeling of isolation. And key to that is collaboration, peer-to-peer support, and actually focusing a lot of the technology, not just on learning, but also on supporting the students' well-being. And Paul's got some really concrete examples of how we've done that at Ribblesdale. So over to you, Paul.
So I think in terms of class community, we underpin everything we do here at Ribblesdale with something called the Ribblesdale Way, and that's the principles that we run the school on. It's the expectations around not only teaching and learning, but also how they conduct themselves on a day-to-day basis. And the Ribblesdale Way is something that applies not only physically in school, but also out of school in this hybrid learning situation. And the thing we've found about that is it has a very positive impact on behaviour and engagement generally. The expectations are set and everyone is clear about what they are. A second aspect of Ribblesdale that is really important for us is form time. And when we're physically in school, that absolutely sets the tone for the whole day, and it puts students in the right frame of mind for moving forward with their academic studies throughout the rest of the day. And we've maintained form time throughout this situation of remote learning because it's fundamental in terms of making sure that the right focus is on learning. And as Stephen mentioned, student well-being is an important thread with this. Without that well-being, then the academic studies aren't going to be successful. So we've done a lot of work around some of our curriculum, particularly around PSHE, to tweak and support it to allow hybrid learning to be more successful. In other words, equipping our students with the aspects such as resilience to survive in a potentially more isolated way of working. I think now what we need to lead on to and look at is the third pillar, which is lesson design. So I'll hand over to Stephen, who'll go through the concepts around this. Thank you.
Thanks again, Paul. So I don't want to teach Granny to suck eggs really here, because designing the lesson in a hybrid system is really not much different than how we would design learning in an in-classroom situation. So there's some key questions which I'm sure everybody on this call is probably aware of. And the most important one is, what are we trying to achieve? What do we want the young people to know and to understand? And what skills do we want them to acquire at the end of the lesson? And then we work back from there, don't we, of course? How are we going to enable them to do that? What do we need to put in place in terms of resources, in terms of reading? How are we going to assess what happens along the way to make sure that we know they are getting there? And so those sort of questions, I guess, are very, very similar to ones which we would all ask in a more traditional classroom environment. Of course, we've got to make sure that works alongside the current curriculum, so we might have to review how that structures into the curriculum quite significantly. Generally, certainly our experience, and I think a lot of the research now suggests that certainly online learning, sometimes less is more, certainly in terms of the actual abundance of content. Sometimes online it can be too overwhelming for some young people, particularly when they're self-managing their own learning. So definitely less is more, I would suggest. And one thing which is really effective online, of course, and via hybrid learning, is the use of various assessment tools, which we'll talk about later. But using those in terms of planning to use those within the lesson is absolutely crucial. And one final thing which sort of links to what we just talked about in terms of interactivity is the use of peer-to-peer collaboration. And of course, within platforms such as Teams, that's very, very easy to do. I don't know whether, Paul, there's some Ribblesdale sort of specifics you'd like to discuss here.
I think absolutely, Stephen. I think the first thing I'd just like to draw out from what you said is the use of that sort of pre-recorded content, maybe recorded in PowerPoint, which allows us to be more flexible in terms of learning delivery, that the students can access that on demand when they want to. And I think woven into that delivery is the use of things like forms quizzes to check the understanding of the young people, because as we've already alluded to earlier in the presentation, it's very important to know where the students are at any given time. Again, using OneNote to provide that structure as well. Lots of our department areas now use OneNote exclusively for delivery, and that gives a consistent approach to both in-school and out-of-school delivery. And using tools such as the reviewing there and class notebook distribution makes it so easy to do for teachers, and to also be able to provide that feedback to students. And I think there are other aspects of Teams as well that are really important. Things like the class materials folders allow materials that students need to access on a lesson-by-lesson basis to be shared, but they are protected, so they are read-only. And we've also moved on and started to adopt things like Wakelet, and we use those extensively now for whole school activity around PSHE, but also around wellbeing as well, and generating wellbeing. So, for example, we've done online virtual sports days where students who are at home can also get involved in what's going on in school, and that's all delivered through Wakelet. Ultimately, though, as Stephen's said earlier, it's not about doing anything differently in terms of teaching and learning. We still teach the top as we would do in school, and with scaffolds to support the young people to achieve the top. The good thing about the use of technology and all the things we've been talking about is that provides the tools to support the young people in hybrid learning to actually reach their full potential. So there are lots of things in lesson design that we've done at Ribblesdale to tweak it to make it more successful in terms of hybrid learning. The next pillar I want to focus on with Stephen is around the engagement and interactivity. So I'll pass on to Stephen now to take you through those to start with.
Great, thanks, Paul. So making our lessons engaging, making sure that youngsters interact with those lessons is absolutely crucial. So things such as breaking them into bite-sized chunks, making sure that the small learning episodes within the learning itself is really, really important, as is including things like, opportunities for collaboration, problem solving, and splitting the learning into not just the bite-sized chunks, but sometimes perhaps with different children collaborating with other children. Again, that concept of peer collaboration is really important, but also making sure that our teachers personalise that learning for specific children and specific areas within their classroom. And also, we mustn't forget that lots of online learning will have episodes where there is face-to-face contact and the teachers are working face-to-face with those young people. And thought does need to be given to what the content and what the purpose and how that's going to be structured as well. It might seem, again, a very obvious thing. And again, it's using similar strategies to which we would all use in the classroom, whether that's questioning or other strategies. That also needs consideration. So again, Paul's going to just sort of add some flesh to the bone, really, and what this might look like, or certainly what it has looked like here at Ribblesdale. Thanks, Paul.
So thank you, Stephen. One thing we've used extensively at Ribblesdale over the past few years around engagement is Minecraft EE, and Minecraft is a fantastic tool. Young people of sort of, early secondary age in the UK are really into Minecraft. So we harness that enthusiasm, and we not only use it in the more obvious areas such as computer science, but we use it, for example, in English, so students can represent their creative writing in a Minecraft world, and that allows them to show exactly their feelings and how they thought when they constructed that writing. And that has really helped in terms of hybrid learning, because it allows students, whether they're in school or out of school, to carry on with that representation of their thoughts and feelings in a different way. We also are using Flipgrid in a lot of areas to allow students to demonstrate that knowledge construction. And also the really cool thing about Flipgrid is that peer-to-peer collaboration, and it allows them to comment and support each other in the development of their work. And coupled with that, obviously in a more formal structure, you've got teams to allow that collaboration. But also we've found that peer-to-peer support is also important when you're in that hybrid learning situation. As Stephen mentioned before, to remove that isolation is a fantastic thing to be able to do. And having that communication and collaboration within teams helps to facilitate that. We've also drawn on other resources such as Mate Code and computer science, to enhance that engagement and interactivity between our students. But ultimately, that interactivity is key to success, along with and coupled with that constant monitoring of progress. Because if students are interacting, not just teacher to student, but also student to student, that peer support really does help facilitate the learning journey. And then that leads us on nicely to the next pillar, which looks at the assessment and feedback and sort of closing the whole loop. So I'll hand back to Stephen, who'll take you through the first points.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. So assessment and feedback within the hybrid environment in some ways can be even more structured, needs to be even more structured than it might be in the classroom. And there's various tools, various sort of approaches which we can use there, of course. So within teams, we use assignments very heavily, both to issue structures for feedback, but also to gain that feedback itself. The use of things such as OneNote for both formative, summative assessment is really, really important. And also, we mustn't forget some of the more informal feedback, which is essential to how youngsters learn. So, for example, within teams, using the ability for pupils to communicate with each other within the chat and indeed with their teachers is really, really important to get that feedback, that flavour, and to take the pulse of how learning is developing within that particular lesson. OneNote, I think Paul will probably talk about in a minute how that's being used really extensively for feedback. And Paul's already mentioned Flipgrid, which has been a really, really valuable resource. And perhaps one of the big advantages, though, for using hybrid technology in terms of assessment, formative and summative assessment, is that it offers a different avenue for some children to receive that feedback and indeed to feedback again to the teacher. And what we've certainly noticed is that in terms of, for example, questions which young people might have about their learning, some children are much more readily willing to offer their questions perhaps in a virtual environment than they are necessarily verbally in the classroom. And certainly for us, that's been quite a learning episode for us. Anyway, Paul's going to just talk through a little bit about what this looks like again at Ribblesdale.
Thank you for that, Stephen. As Stephen's just outlined, OneNote is key to success, really, in terms of that feedback. Using things like audio feedback really does save teachers time, but also that feedback when the students listen to it is a lot more impactful as well, particularly with the boys. Coupled with that, we use Teams assignments, and that allows us to really effectively track engagement. We can see at a granular level who's interacting with the work, who's completing the work, and also to assess it and then provide that feedback. And we're using aspects such as rubrics to really save time there once they're set up. Forms and quizzes are absolutely the bread and butter of everything that we're doing in terms of assessment. Embedding those in the middle of the lesson allows you to get that instant feedback, which you would normally do via question and answer in the physical classroom, and allows you to adapt the learning journey accordingly. And we've moved on through this period of hybrid learning to looking at new aspects and new opportunities such as Nearpod. And we're using that for both synchronous and asynchronous delivery. But the really cool thing about Nearpod is you can embed activities, but also assessment points all the way through, so that you get that feedback from the whole class, whether they're looking at it in a synchronous or asynchronous way. So absolutely no one feels left out. But what we've considered is the 5 pillars to hybrid learning so far, and that's all well and good, but absolutely it will only work if we get our students on board. So I want to take a minute or two to consider how you might get the students hooked and actually on board with what we're doing in terms of hybrid learning. We've already said that clear systems and expectations are key. Without those, we're not going to be able to move anywhere with our students. And that clarity around the curriculum as well provides a level platform in which to improve that engagement. Teams Insights, I'll just mention whether that's whole class or individual, allows you to look at that communication activity and that digital activity within that virtual learning environment. And again, OneNote, it allows, as a teacher, you can review the students' work periodically throughout the lesson live and give live feedback to those students. And the really good thing about that is the names go up in bold as well, so you can see when students have added work, so you're not having to hunt through 30 pieces or 30 individual OneNote books to look for that. And we've already said about assignments, that assignments is really, really key because it identifies those students who aren't interacting and taking an active role within the lesson and within that hybrid learning, and allows us to put things in place to help encourage them to get on board with what we're trying to do. So that hopefully gives you an idea about how maybe you can consider in terms of hooking our students around getting them on board with that hybrid learning journey. So to bring everything together, I think what Stephen and myself would now like to do is just take the opportunity to raise some key questions and then highlight some next steps that you might want to consider in your hybrid learning journey. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, so hopefully some of those points have been really useful for you, but the most important thing is for you all to reflect on some of those key questions and the 5 pillars, really. So the first question I would imagine is really important for you to ask is, how confident are you with each of those 5 pillars? Are there areas which you want to work further on, you want to further develop, you want some support on? I think that's really important. Clearly, you would want to reflect perhaps on where your own strengths are and where the areas of development are, but also, I guess, how you're going to use hybrid learning, flex it over the coming months and years, because I think it's really important that after all the work all schools have done in terms of developing their hybrid learning provision, that doesn't sort of get put on hold once we're out of the real struggle which we're in at the moment with the pandemic. There's a real opportunity there to use that learning in terms of how we use hybrid learning itself and capitalise on that as we go forward. And there's all sorts of situations where I feel, certainly at Ribblesdale, we will be doing precisely that. And I suppose that's quite a positive note to sort of end on, really, because it's about going forward, isn't it? It's how we use everything which we've learned in a really difficult situation to ultimately make learning better for our young people. And I think Paul's just going to go through some of the potential links for future reference.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I think what I want to do is just sort of distill all this down into maybe 2 or 3 aspects that I'd like you to consider at this point moving forward. So the first one is to review the plans you have in place, not only for hybrid learning, but for the longer term digital transformation within your organisation. How is technology going to effectively support not only face-to-face, but also virtual learning within your organisation? Secondly, I'll ask you to go and visit the Microsoft Educator Centre and take the following courses that are shown on the screen to support your hybrid learning journey. But there are also some nuggets in there that will help you with that wider and longer term digital transformation. And I think the other thing finally to consider is how you're going to use the learning points from now, what's going on in terms of hybrid learning, to spark that creativity to enhance the normal running within your school in the future months and years. So how are you going to capitalise on what you've learned, works and doesn't work, and move that forward and translate that into normal running? So from me and Stephen, it's a big thank you for listening to us. And as you can see on screen now, you can hopefully see our Twitter handles. So feel free to reach out if you've got any other questions or queries, or just to link up with us. And we look forward to supporting you in the future. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. We have just enough time to answer any questions you might have. We're all here in the live chat, so post them below and any one of our speakers will happily respond.